goodness. Who is he?
Welcome to our second alpha video in the series. If you are returning from seeing our first one, welcome back. If you haven't seen the first one yet, what are you doing? Go back and watch it. For those of you that don't know us, I'm Antony.
And I'm Darren.
And we form Catalyst. If you want to know more about where we come from, what our jobs are, click somewhere on the screen and you'll go back and watch the first video where we introduce a bit about ourselves. But if you are here now, stay and enjoy our second video first.
Yeah, this week we are looking at Jesus. Who is he? And I think that is one of the most biggest questions around the world at the moment is, who is Jesus? People say that he was a con man. People say that he was a magician. But who actually is he? And that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at today. We're looking at three separate different questions, which will come shortly after this. But I just want you to think now to yourself, who is Jesus to you? Now, for me, he is the one that went to that cross. He is the one that died on that cross for all of my sin and for all of the world's sin. But to you, he may be somebody completely different.
So, our first question, what would you want to be famous for? And when we're younger, I think it's one that we're asked quite a lot when we're around friends. Or what would you want to be famous for? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do when you're older? And it's always things like, I'd love to be an astronaut. I'd love to be a rock star. Things like that. But when you get asked it in a situation like this, it really does make you think, what would you want to be famous for? What is it that you'd want to be remembered for?
I think it'd be snowboarding.
I grew up watching Disney Channel and everything, and I want to be on one of those sitcoms where I can make children smile.
The next biggest technological invention. Like, I want to be the next Steve Jobs.
Singing. I would want to be famous for singing. I would want to be able to meet Beyonce and us be friends.
Fashion designer, for sure.
But doing backflips. Because I can't do a backflip.
You want to be famous for backflips?
Yeah, why not?
Being able to taste a food and know exactly what's in it, like a food connoisseur.
I don't want to be famous. I really don't.
Okay, not money. Oh, what would I want to be famous for? That's a good question.
Being the best dancer.
Performing, on Broadway.
Baseball player.
Oh, for my dashing good looks.
Now, when we discussed this with our group last night, there were some fantastic answers. We had some people saying they'd want to be famous for acting, for writing, for singing, for something musical. We had someone say they'd want to create something which everyone can use to help with a sustainable way of living. Some said they'd want to make something to make the world a better place. Someone else said they'd love to find a cure for COVID-19, which is very apt in this time that we're living now. Some people said that they wouldn't want to be famous. It would cause too much stress. It completely changes your lifestyle when you have fame thrust upon you. But we had someone say that actually they'd want to make something so that they're not famous now, but that they leave something behind, something which they can remember by, something that they're famous for doing good. Personally, I said I'd want to be famous for something to do with music or for writing because it's something I enjoy. And I think if you're going to be famous for something, you need to enjoy it because it will be your whole life now. Everything you do will revolve around that. But we forget those famous people that we can't see. When we talk about famous faces, we think of musicians, we think of TV stars, we think of film stars, because that's the society we live in now. Those are big things, things where we can see the name of the person, things where we can see the face of the person. But there have been so many famous figures in the past. Isaac Newton, all his discoveries make him famous for what he did. There was Alexander Fleming, the guy that founded penicillin, but again, someone we wouldn't think of. Aneri Boven, I think that's how you say it, but the guy that founded the NHS. Huge, but not someone we think of when we'd say fame. And then there's Jesus, who, if you are Christian, you think of Jesus as part of your life, part of what you do. You don't think of him as a famous historic figure. If you're not Christian, it might not even cross your mind to think of Jesus that way. But there's so much written about Jesus in historic terms to show that he is one of the biggest famous figures in our history.
Okay, so textual criticism works by comparing ancient manuscripts to discover the original wording. Basically, the more copies of a manuscript there are, and the closer they are to the date of the original manuscript, the more confident we can be. For example, Herodotus and Thucydides were ancient historians who wrote in the 5th century BC. Now, the earliest copies we have of their writings are from around 900 AD, so there's more than a 1300-year gap, and we only have 8 copies of their writings. Yet no classical scholar would doubt that these writings have come down to us in a form that's true to their original copies.
And this is the case with many other ancient works as well. For example, Livy's Roman History, 900-year gap, with 20 copies. Caesar's Gallic War, 950-year gap, with 9 to 10 copies. And Tacitus, 1,000-year gap, with just 20 copies. And then we come to the New Testament, and what we see here is that the time gap is significantly shorter. It was written between 40 to 100 AD, and the earliest manuscript was written as early as 130 AD, and there are 5,309 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin, and 9,300 others, making the New Testament totally unique amongst other ancient books.
Textual critic F.J.A. Hort said this: "In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone amongst ancient prose writings." So, we can look confidently to what's written in the New Testament.
What a great question, Antony. I don't think I'd ever want to be famous. I see way too much negativity in the media and on social media, and I just wouldn't want to put myself through that. And I find that anybody who is famous that gets put through the media and everything, they've got to be made of stronger stuff than what I am, I think, because I just don't think I could actually cope. But that leads us on to our next question of why do you think Jesus is so famous? Now, we had many different answers in our group, but let's have a look at what some of the public thought about this question.
This has been around for a while.
I don't know too much about Christianity, but I can say probably because of his words, how his teachings. I think it's the whole martyr for a cause type of thing.
I mean, I think that level of sacrifice people resonate with.
I think generations of telling stories and ritual, because somebody wrote a book about him.
I never really thought of him that way. I never really thought of him as someone famous. Is he famous? I don't know.
He's pretty famous.
Okay.
He kind of represents the ideal prophet that is encaptured in so many different religions and creeds across the world.
He's the guy that has forgiven all of our sins. He died on the cross for all of us, right?
Because he's the only one that overcame death.
It's because he healed a lot of people.
Sandals.
Sandals. Great sandals. What I do think is to do aggressive propagation of Christianity.
It's a character that lots of people just confide in, don't they? So I think that's probably why he's quite big.
I don't think you're let off easily by saying he was a great thinker or philosopher, because actually he went around saying he was the Messiah. That's why he was crucified. He was crucified because he said he was the Son of God. So he either, in my view, was the Son of God or he was nuts. And I find it hard to accept that all the millions and millions of lives, half the earth for 2,000 years, have felt their lives touched and inspired by some nutter. I don't believe it.
Well, there are some of the answers they give. I love the one, he's famous for his sandals. Now, that's sandals without socks, people. Sandals without socks. Now, some of the answers that we were given is that he wasn't famous just because of a book. He is the Son of God. Due to his crucifixion, he was a challenging figure. He was contrary to what the leaders were at that time, and he overcame death. And that moves us on to our next question of who do people think Jesus is? Now, watch this video of what some of the public thought, and we'll be back shortly where we can see what some of our young people have thought and continue with the rest of the video.
I think people think of Jesus as the long-haired guy in the movies.
With sandals in a room?
With a beard, who's having a hard time.
Most people think Jesus is white. I don't know if that's true.
I think people think that Jesus is just the guy on the cross.
Growing up, I've heard that Jesus is a really forgiving person, like he's a friend.
A wise person that, kind of wandered and taught and everything. Some people think he's the Son of God. Some people think that he's the Savior.
God's son. He's kind of like the connection between God and people.
I see him more as a historical figure.
A good dude, and he was a prophet.
Big, powerful guy in the sky.
I don't know. I mean, he's got a lot of rules.
They think he's a prophet. They think he's a good man. He's done a lot of good deeds. But a lot of people don't recognize him that he is also God.
People kind of think like Jesus as same as God. They kind of put him in the same level as God. I don't know.
So, that was really good to hear from some of those. Some of the people in our group have actually said he is the human manifestation of God who came to help us understand. Someone said he's a teacher, prophet, son of God and spirit of God. We even had he's human and one of us. A guy who saves lives. He was someone put on earth to be a view of God. Now on the Zoom alpha last night, my internet decided to go completely and utterly wrong for me, and it kicked me from the group, and then all things went wrong. But for me, Jesus is God in human form, fully God and also fully human. He came to experience what humans go through and ultimately take on death and conquer it. Meaning that when we die, it is not the end for us. We will be with him in heaven, as he has now bridged that gap between heaven and earth by his death on the cross. This illustration shows it a little bit better than I can explain it, but through Jesus' death and resurrection, we can have eternal life.
There are 4 pieces of evidence for Jesus' resurrection. First, his tomb was empty. When Jesus' close friends went to visit his tomb on the 3rd day, his body wasn't there. People have come up with all kinds of explanations for this, but none of them stand up against thoughtful evaluation. For example, maybe the authorities stole the body. But if they did, then they would have shown that they had it when people start saying that Jesus had risen from the dead.
Or others might say, okay, then robbers stole the body. When the disciples heard that Jesus had been seen, they ran to the tomb. Jesus' body wasn't there, but the grave clothes that he'd been wrapped in were still there. These would have been the only valuable things that the robbers might have taken. Even the piece that had been around Jesus' head had been folded up and put off to the side. The second piece of evidence for Jesus' resurrection is his presence with the disciples. Jesus was seen more than 11 times after his resurrection, and on one occasion by a group of around 500 people. Now some might say, well, that could have been a hallucination. But think about it. 500 people can't hallucinate the same thing.
The third piece of evidence is the transformation we see in the disciples. Here's a group of people who were devastated that their leader had been killed, and they were afraid themselves that they would be arrested and killed. And then suddenly, they were transformed. Instead of being discouraged and fearful, they were full of hope and courage. And they were so confident in the message, they went around telling everyone, Jesus is alive.
And many of the disciples were later killed or tortured because they wouldn't stop spreading this message. Why would someone be prepared to die for something they knew wasn't true? But the disciples believed it was true. It had transformed their life, and this extraordinary movement has spread all over the world.
And that's the fourth piece of evidence. Jesus is still impacting lives today. There are now more than 2.4 billion Christians around the world, representing every ethnic, economic, and social background. The disciples spoke about a risen Jesus, and there are billions of Christians around the world today who also speak of an encounter with the risen Jesus Christ.
So there we saw some facts about Jesus' life and the proof behind him as a historical figure and some of the amazing things he's done. And we saw there the impact he's had on so many people's lives. And for us personally, he's had an impact on our lives to the point the jobs we do daily, we talk about him, we learn about him, and we share the good news about Jesus.
Definitely. And one of the verses that comes to mind when about our faith is the verse from Matthew 11:28, where it says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Jesus can provide that rest. He can provide that hole that all of us have in our hearts. Somebody told me once about we've got a jigsaw puzzle piece missing from our hearts. And that is Jesus. That is the faith that we've got that needs to fill that little hole. Now, through Jesus, we can find that jigsaw puzzle and we can actually mend our hearts. And through his death and resurrection, we are all forgiven of all the sins of through our previous life. So we just need to all come to Jesus, and he accepts everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you've done in the past. He accepts every single person, because no one sin is greater than another.
So we've reached the end of our second week of Alpha, and we hope you've learned something. We hope that you can take something away from this video. A reminder that we will be running an Alpha course every Monday, 7:30 till 8:30 on Zoom. And if you want to be involved in that, contact us and let us know. You can see our email addresses and our website link on the screen now. If you have any questions, if you have anything you want to talk to us about, or maybe it's just actually you're interested to know a bit more about what Catalyst Youth UK can do, then please contact us. We'd love to hear from you.
And all that's left to say is that I hope you have an amazing day, an amazing week, whatever time or part of the week you're watching this. And then hopefully we'll either see you on the next video, or we'll see you actually on our meeting on a Monday. And don't forget that you can contact us for all those links that are on the page now. And even leave a comment underneath this video, and then we can try and respond to you that way. So it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from him.
See you next time.
Bye.